Well, good afternoon, everybody watching live on YouTube and on Twitter. And to those listening on the podcast, welcome to Cricket Unfiltered. I'm, of course, Menners, and it is a really exciting time. The day before Australia's T20 World Cup campaign will begin. Australia set to take on New Zealand at the Sydney Cricket Ground, which is just a stone's throw away from where I live. And it's going to be a fantastic World Cup opener in prospect. I've just been at the Sydney Cricket Ground. There was a press conference. Well, Kane Williamson ended up doing his press conference via Zoom, and then Aaron Finch did his press conference in person. And then I saw some of the Aussie batters warming up in the nets. So I am just going to report on the news from the Sydney Cricket Ground today. Take questions if anyone is watching live. And that'll be it, really. A lot of extra podcasts coming over the World Cup. As I said in the last show, that we're going to take a more bite-sized approach. We'll be doing reports after every Aussie game. We'll be doing, we'll be looking at the WBBL in different podcasts. So yeah, just there's going to be plenty of these extra little audio shows to increase the coverage of the World Cup. So I guess the big news for Australia is Josh Inglis has ruled out of the T20 World Cup after injuring his hand with a 6-iron. And Aaron Finch was in the same group as Inglis, and he said basically he came down like quite steep on his downswing with the 6-iron, and it snapped near the handle, like near where he grips the bat. And it was quite a deep cut. Fortunately, no tendon damage. And they did suggest maybe that the golf club was damaged in transit, and that's why it broke. Because it is quite strange for a club to sort of break near your hand. Usually, I guess they break further down the shaft near the club head. Really unfortunate news for Josh Inglis. He was, of course, a part of the 2021 victorious T20 World Cup squad, and unfortunately doesn't get to take part in the defence. So he's been replaced by Cameron Green, and I think that was the clear favourite from the beginning. He was so close to. Well, he was so close to making the squad or making the squad due to an injury. I think the Australian selectors and team made it clear that although they didn't have him in the squad, that they maybe realized he was becoming a bigger asset than they thought when they picked the squad. So perhaps, so they got their mulligan. They got to put him in. I guess the risk is with Josh Inglis being ruled out, who's a fine wicket keeper, that if Matt Wade were to get injured on the day of a match, who would keep? So Aaron Finch talked about this at his press conference. They assessed the risk of Wade injuring himself on the day of a match to be 0.5%. So not even 1%. Because, of course, the fortunate thing about the tournament being at home is in Australia that if Wade were to injure himself, say, the day before a match, well, they could replace him in the squad with a wicketkeeper. And because we're in Australia, that'd be easy. But if it were to happen, in the warm-ups, there's a 0.5% chance that could happen. And they're willing to take that chance. I asked Finch who would wicket keep if that were to eventuate, and he seemed to be pretty confident that David Warner would do the wicket keeping. He made a joke that he might do it, but then he said he's not sure his old knees are up for it. And he also said maybe Mitchell Starc, who wicket kept as a youngster, could bowl a few overs at the top and then take the gloves and wicket keep through the middle. So I don't know if many of your older fans remember that this happened in the 1992 50 over World Cup. Ian Healy was injured, and David Boone ended up wicket-keeping against India at the Gabba, and he actually did a fine job. There was some tricky run out to end the game. We might see that history repeated if something would happen to Matt Wade. So I have to say, I was at the net, speaking of Matt Wade, and in the net we had Glenn Maxwell, Marcus Stoinis, Steve Smith, Aaron Finch, and Matty Wade, all mainly throwdowns, a few net bowlers. And Matty Wade was the most impressive by far. Now, I know a lot of listeners and viewers will think, man, as we know, you love Wade, but he could not miss the middle of the bat. Everything was just flying away. Matty Wade is in such good form. So that was great to watch. Maxwell was hitting them pretty well. Smith looked a little annoyed, I would say, or looked a little frustrated. Some of the wicket, I'm not sure why, but I don't think he'll be playing in the opening match tomorrow, from what Finch said. So then maybe he's just a little bit annoyed that he's not going to be opening in the big game. A player like Smith is not used to missing out. All right, so let's go through some of what the captain said in their press conferences. So Kane Williamson confirmed, obviously, Daryl Mitchell's out of the first game, which is a real shame, but he is tracking well for the rest of the tournament. A journalist asked him a really good question that basically New Zealand haven't won in Australia in over 10 years in any format. And he asked Kane if that was playing on their minds. And of course, Kane played a straight back bat and said, well, he said, well, we've come up against some really good Australian sides, meaning maybe they won't beat Australia this weekend, but they'll beat one of the other sides. But yeah, that is quite significant that New Zealand haven't won in any format in Australia for 10 years. So you've got to question whether they're due or whether their players actually know how to win in these conditions. Williamson mentioned that there's a little bit of rain around the Sydney Cricket Ground, and that may impact the team they go for. So they're just going to not name their 11 yet until they see the weather on the day. He also said that he's noticed there's a few fresh surfaces around the country, and he expects that could impact results, meaning we'll probably see the quick bowlers maybe take some early wickets. I don't know about that. I know there's a bit of rain around Australia, but still, I think we'll get predominantly good batting tracks. But we'll see. Maybe the quick bowlers will get some extra assistance if there's some moisture in the wickets. And that actually does lend itself to really good, exciting T20 cricket. Doesn't always have to be a high scoring game for it to be a ripper. And we might see that. And starting with the first game at the Sydney Cricket Ground, which there is a little bit of rain around. Steve O'Keefe, who's been on Cricket Unfiltered and friend of the podcast, so he was in the nets with the Kiwis, helping them working with some of their spinners, chatting to them about the conditions. I think O'Keefe is friends with some of the coaches in the New Zealand coaching staff or something. But yeah, so he was helping them out. It's quite strange. So you've got Dan Vettori, the former New Zealand left arm spinner, working with Australia as a coach, and he was in the nets with the Aussies doing throwdowns and bowling to them. And role reversal, you've got Steve O'Keefe, the Australian left arm finger spinner, working with the Kiwi side. So that was quite funny. And look, I'm sure Steve O'Keefe, who does so well for the Sydney Sixers, will be able to pass on some wisdom to the Kiwis. So, yeah, good on him. And lastly, Kane Williamson was asked, what he thinks he'll do with Adam Milne and Lockie Ferguson. Will they both fit into the same 11? Because obviously you've got Bolt and Southey and the spinners and the all-rounders. So how will you choose between those four quicks? But, Williamson did say there was a chance Milne and Ferguson could play. It's a long tournament. You might want to pair them together on some of the quicker wickets. Maybe you'd leave out a Southey. You wouldn't leave out Bolt, I wouldn't imagine. But yeah, that could be quite devastating for New Zealand. Milne and Ferguson have both got serious pace, can trouble the top order. Put them with Trent Bolt. That's a pretty handy attack. And I said in our T20 World Cup preview show, and if you haven't listened to it, go back and catch up with it. But I think maybe New Zealand could lift the trophy. I think they're due. All right, so that was Kane Williamson's press conference, and I can see if you are watching live and you want to ask a question, please put them all in the comments, and when I finish wrapping up the press conferences, I will answer all the questions. Now, Aaron Finch was asked if Cameron Green is a chance of playing in the opening game. He said no, because he's just flying into Sydney today, the day before the match, and he's no chance of playing tomorrow. he said he will open. Aaron Finch will definitely open, but I think we knew that from the practice games. He doesn't want to name his team yet for tomorrow night's game because he said he had a look at the pitch and it actually looked quite dry. So that's interesting. Although the overhead conditions may be wet, the pitch could be quite dry. And then we might see two spinners in Agar and Zampa. I think that's very unlikely. I think Finch was just holding his cards close to his chest. I don't think that'll happen. But he said the pitch looked dry. And I guess if they did turn up and it looked like a ranked turner, then they might be forced to leave out one of the quicks. And I just wonder which quick you leave out. Stark and Hazel would have to play. And that means Paddy Cummins has to sit out. Sit out, mate. You might have to. I know you're the captain of the ODI side and test team, but if Agar were to come in, I think Cummins would sit out or be dropped, so to speak. Aaron Finch was also asked about the mood around the camp. He said they're just relieved to be there. He did mention that a lot of the players were drug tested yesterday after training, so they were sort of held back and tested. I'm sure that's just protocol, but he did mention it. The most notable drug testing I've heard of was when Rachel Haynes, after winning the T20 World Cup in 2020, missed out on going on stage with Katy Perry because she was being drug tested. At least none of the Aussie players missed out on dancing with Katy Perry yesterday when they were tested. What else did Aaron Finch was asked about facing Trent Boult, and Aaron Finch said about Trent Boult, he has had my number. And then he sort of went into a few things about his footwork patterns. And as listeners to Cricket Unfiltered will know, when Aaron Finch starts talking about footwork patterns and all that kind of thing, I just get irate because he doesn't sound good when he does that. It just sounds like excuse making. But yeah, look, I think Aaron Finch is well aware that Boult's had his number because he said it. And that'll be a huge challenge for Finch tomorrow night with Boult looking to swing the ball back into his pad and obviously, trap him LB or get him bowled. And we'll just see if Finch is up to the task. Did Finch look good in the nets? He looked fine. I mean, he didn't look terrible. But yeah, as I said, Wade looked great. Maxwell looked great. Stoinis looked pretty good. What else did Aaron Finch say? They were talking about the shortened, the possibility of a very short match on Saturday night with the rain. And Aaron Finch, talking about tactics, said he only found out on the series in this recent T20 series against India that if the game is 8 overs or less, you only have to use 4 bowlers. So if it's a really short game, you might decide to go for an extra batter or do you go for an extra bowler? It was very interesting. But yeah, he said that's probably something that the rain could tangibly affect tomorrow. If it was a really short game, maybe you just load up in batting and go hell for leather and just play 4 bowlers or 3 bowlers and all-rounder to make up the 4 bowlers. That was sort of the main takeaways from Aaron Finch's press conference. He was asked about the extra pressure of playing at home, and he said that they'll just block out the external noise. They did talk about creating an environment in the team that doesn't change whether they're winning or losing. Just, think about the sort of environment they want to have and be aware that only one team can win this T20 World Cup, and there's not a lot between them. So make sure they have, I think basically we're saying just foster a good environment, whether we win or lose. So obviously he's going to say stuff like that, but I thought he handled it pretty well. And in T20 cricket, it can just be the very fine margins, and some of those margins might not be in your control. It can be a freakish deflection, as we saw in the 50 over World Cup final. So yeah, good stuff from Aaron Finch. And yeah, really excited. So that's the sort of the details to come out of the Sydney Cricket Ground. Yeah, it was kind of a bit sort of somber, I would say, at the SCG today, almost the calm before the storm. Yeah, I can't wait for the T20 World Cup storm that is approaching. Now, let's just read through some of these questions. This is from Stephen Matlock. Well, he's asked, do you think Green will play? And I don't think he will because he's just flying over from WA today. Pronto, hi, Manners, what is the actual chance of raining at the SCG tomorrow? Well, look, Pranto, I think there's a chance there'll be some interruptions, but the Sydney Cricket Ground has exceptional drainage, just absolutely top class drainage. It's a fantastic ground. And I was saying to one of the journalists today that, it could pour with rain pretty much all tomorrow. And then if it stops raining at 6 o'clock, by 7:30, they'll be ready to play. So, we'll still get a game tomorrow night. And I'm hoping we get most of it in. Stephen Matlock has asked me how good have the initial round games been. Yes, sensational stuff. The Netherlands and Sri Lanka through from one of the groups, and as I record this, the West Indies and Ireland are locked in battle to see who will go through to the next round. I'm really happy for the Netherlands. I used to live in the Netherlands, so I have an affection for the country. So I'm so thrilled they're through to the next round, and hopefully I'll get to see them play at the SCG. I haven't checked the fixtures, but I'll get out my orange for that game. Disappointed for the Namibians, but really good effort from them. And it just shows the gap between the best and the worst sides in this competition is very close. You've got Namibia beating Sri Lanka one day, and the UAE beating Namibia a couple of days later. So Adam Gilchrist made a really good point about T20 cricket on the radio, that actually in some ways it's bringing the cricket world together, because it's easier to compete in T20 cricket as opposed to, say, Test cricket. It's easy to get a T20 program up and running. And I thought that, it's been evidenced in the tournament so far. Jay, most wickets for Australia throughout the tournament. Really good question. I'm going to go for Josh Hazelwood, my man from Bendemeer, who's been on this podcast a few times. Terrific fella, and he's turned himself into the best white ball bowler in the world, pretty much. And finally, Stephen Matlock, India to take out Pakistan on Sunday. Look, Stephen, unfortunately, I'm going to be picking Pakistan in that match. I think Pakistan are going to make it through to the final. That's what I'm tipping. I think a Pakistan-New Zealand final, and I think it'll start on Sunday in a damp thriller at the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Sorry to all the Indian fans. Anthony, this is a good question. Bat or bowl, or bowl or bat first? I'm assuming he's talking about New Zealand v Australia at the Sydney Cricket Ground. And look, I can't answer that. Depends on the weather. Usually in T20 cricket, if there's rain around, you like to chase. So you know what you're chasing. So you know what the target is. Sorry. So, but one thing that Aaron Finch was talking about with, playing T20 cricket in Australia is, as opposed to in the UAE where the last one was, is the toss doesn't quite determine the outcome as much, because the grounds are a bit bigger and you can defend the boundaries a bit more. So we might see that trend actually swing back the other way, where it's not all chasing teams that win and the toss isn't as important. And I actually think that's good. I think the toss shouldn't be that decisive in any match, but especially, you're looking at a T20 World Cup. Aaron Finch won a lot of tosses in the 2020 World Cup, and we lifted the title. So, Anyway, look, that was the Menez report from the SCG day -1 from the New Zealand v Australia T20 World Cup opening group match. Thanks everybody for listening on the podcast app. We've had a lot of great feedback from the interview with Craig Foster in the last release. Look, it made the radio, it made the national newspapers. It's prompted a really, I think, important discussion. And at the same time, that day, it was all blowing up with the Alinta Energy debacle. So a lot going on. But Paul and I have thought a lot about what Craig said, and we're going to be just reducing our coverage of the Afghanistan match and team, and we'll talk about that together when we record next time together. I want Paul to be a part of that. But we have the utmost respect for the Afghanistan cricketers. But I was quite concerned with what Craig said, and I've made my journey pretty open. Like I asked Craig to enlighten me because I just don't exactly know how to handle this. And I think he actually made some really astute points. And I'd love to hear from you if you listen to the interview with Craig, what you think Australia should do, what you're comfortable with your country doing. But yeah, this sort of human rights issue is so cut and dry. I mean, if females aren't allowed to go to school or play sport, I don't know. I just think that's a really easy decision, and it's not a reflection on the Afghanistan cricket team. But unfortunately, the Taliban have taken over. All right. Well, what a way to end the podcast. Look, thanks everybody for listening. Pumped for this tournament to continue. Thanks everybody for your comments, and we'll be back soon.